Truth Caviar, the show about ideas that matter. Hosted by global thinkers Brent M. Eastwood and Vadim Bichutsky. Hey everybody, hope you're all having a great week. This is episode 5 of the Truth Caviar show. Today we're talking about the rise of the managerial elite and the administrative state. So Arthur Schlesinger famously said that class conflict is essential to the preservation of freedom. Joseph Burnham said, only power restrains power. Social power exists in 3 realms: political, cultural, and economic. And there is class conflict within each one of these realms. All 3 realms of Western society today are fronts in the new class war. The first class war, the classical class war, was between workers and capitalists. The capitalists were later joined by university-credentialed managers and professionals. As the West entered World War I and World War II, the class war was suspended in order to mobilize all available resources for the war effort. After World War II, a consensus emerged called Democratic Pluralism. Organizations and leaders, grassroots party politicians, trade unions, farm associations, church leaders representing the working class and rural constituencies bargained with national elites in the economy, in the culture, and in government. Since the 1960s, this post-war system of democratic pluralism has been dismantled by a revolution from above led by college-educated managers and professionals who have replaced the old-school bourgeoisie capitalists as the dominant elite. Democratic pluralism has been replaced by technocratic neoliberalism. Several things have contributed to this revolution from above. In the realm of the economy, corporations have promoted de-unionization and labor market deregulation to the detriment of workers. Firms have embraced global labor arbitrage, offshoring production to poor countries with much lower labor costs, or employing immigrant workers to weaken unions and escape the constraints of national labor regulations. In politics and government, parties that were national federations of local mass membership organizations have given way to parties controlled by donors and media consultants. Also, many of the powers of the democratically elected legislatures have been usurped by or delegated to executive agencies, courts, or transnational bodies such as WHO, UN, NATO, etc., over which college-educated professionals have more influence than the working class. This technocratic revolution from above has provoked a populist counter-revolution from below by the defensive and disempowered working class. Large numbers of alienated working class voters, realizing that the political systems of their nations are rigged and that mainstream parties will continue to ignore their interests and values, have found unlikely champions in the form of Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Marine Le Pen, and Matteo Salvini. In the economy, populists favor restricting trade and immigration to shield workers from competing with imports and immigrants. In politics, populists denounce neoliberal parties and factions as corrupt and elitist. In the culture, populists denounce elite-promulgated multiculturalism, wokeism, and flout the etiquette, language, and norms of political correctness that mark membership in the university-educated managerial elite. In response to populist rebellions from below, the managerial elites may turn to outright repression of the working class by restricting access to political activity and the media by all dissenters, not populists alone. I was suspended by Twitter for quoting Tucker Carlson.
Yes, I mean, it's just amazing what this has created over the years. You have the managerial overclass as part of the administrative state. Then you have technocratic neoliberals replacing other types of classes. Then you have the high-tech caste system that we have to deal with, like with Twitter, the example there that Vadim shared. And there's this belief of George Orwell in Animal Farm. Remember the phrase from Animal Farm, some people are more equal than others. And then against that, you have the working class of low density populated from the heartland of the United States. So this gives way to populist demagogues. So how can the working class get more political power? Well, they end up voting and supporting populist candidates. And then this leads to protests. So we had the Yellow Vest protest in France over fuel price hikes. Then you had the Canadian trucker protests over COVID restrictions. And recently right now, you have the Dutch farmer protests. And that is because of environmental restrictions on agricultural necessities. Then you have something like Brexit, where the populists voted to leave the European Union. I'm actually against Brexit. I think Britain should have a seat at the table in the EU, but I definitely understand why Britain wanted to keep their sovereignty.
Yeah, I believe that each nation should be sovereign. I believe in the nation state. Each nation shouldn't delegate authority to places like the UN and the European Union.
So you're like Nigel Farage with Brexit.
I guess.
There was also a backlash in Germany from immigration from Muslim countries, specifically Syria. So you have all these things that are happening from the elites that know better, this technocratic elite administrative state. And they know better than the masses. And the masses rise up and they rebel against this. So let's talk about that class. We have college-educated class of managers versus people who would be entrepreneurs or who would create businesses that have goods and services that sell, that people like, and not creating the value that you would expect from capitalism. So technocratic neoliberals, there's not as many labor unions. About 1 in 10 Americans belong to a labor union. So the labor unions have decreased in power and membership. And then you have corporations that are outsourcing manufacturing jobs. We had that from 1999 to 2009.
Right. Globalization, the rise of globalization.
Correct. And this leads to employing immigrants for low-skilled jobs that has a backlash against low-skilled Americans, are people who are already inhabiting the country.
What's interesting about globalization is that, traditionally globalization was viewed as outsourcing sort of blue-collar jobs, manufacturing jobs, trade union jobs to poor countries. But globalization has also overtaken white-collar jobs now. That's globalization 2.0. That's the new thing, is that hiring programmers from Asian countries due to the rise of the internet and the ability to communicate across the world. That has also affected in a negative way, the white-collar jobs as well.
Correct. So they're taking that away, but we still have this technocratic neoliberal class that has more political influence. They dominate the media, they dominate bureaucracies, and they dominate corporations. Which
Hollywood too, right?
And don't forget about Hollywood. We talked about
the culture,
the woke capitalism, the woke economic class last episode.
Yeah, for sure. This is very interesting development so we got globalization, we got new technologies, we have technocratic neoliberalism in government, in the economy, in the culture. And this class of technocrats, they're taking power and rights away from everyday citizens. What do you think of that, Brent?
Yeah, that's the scary part. And that's why we're doing these episodes, to get you accustomed to what is going on. What are the trends in the United States in politics? We see woke capitalism. We see this rise of managerial elites. It starts in the educational systems with people who are teaching our sons and daughters going to college and finding out that they face a very difficult time in college if they're conservatives. And this creates people wanting to become more populist oriented. So they want restrictions on global trade. They want restrictions on immigration. They believe that neoliberals are corrupt and elitist. They fear the deep state bureaucrats. They feel like they don't have any power over their government. They're not politically correct, and they're being repressed by the managerial class.
So I'm not against, I don't hate bureaucrats. I'm not against all bureaucrats, all technocrats, but I start to have a problem with it when you start infringing on the rights of everyday citizens. That's when I have a problem. It's good to have smart people in certain positions that have specialized skills to oversee, certain aspects of the country. I think that's important. But just like everything that happens in the progressive ethos, they completely overdo it. Like, yeah, I agree with you up to a point, but don't go all the way there where it's like, now I can't start a business. Now, in order to start my business, I have to get it approved by some bureaucrat in my state. That's when I really, start to question all of these institutions and all of these, the central planners.
And the founders believed in decentralization. That's why we have a system of federalism and believing in a republic. So when you have this centralization of power from capitals like Washington, D.C., but also at the state level. So you have this group of lobbyists, you have this group of managers, you have these elites running for office, and then you have power centralized around capitals. That is unhealthy for democracy, and it takes away from pluralism, which is what we want. So democratic pluralism is the cure for this. And what you want to have is a high level of what is called social capital. This is a group of people who decide to join different social ways to get together and have fellowship. So that could be a church, that could be a union, that could be a political group, that could be a nonprofit or a charity. And it's a way to get involved. And so the idea that democratic pluralism would be a check and balance against centralized power.
As Lynn says, countervailing power. Only power restrains power. You need a check on power. And that's what our founding fathers believed, right? When they designed the Constitution, right? That only power restrains power. You need a check and balance on the power of whether that's politician or entity or bureaucracy or what have you.
So now we not only have the left-right divide, which we could talk about forever, but we have this divide between insiders and outsiders, between elites and populists. So the transatlantic elite. So remember, we have these elites on the east and west coast, and the northeast and the northwest and the Southern California too. Transatlantic elites, and they've inherited this upper class status due to technocracy and other elites getting together, like we said. So transatlantic elite. And then there's a belief in no meritocracy or upward mobility. That's what America is all about. We're trapped in these castes and these classes, and the elites control the means of production. And they believe they're citizens of the world instead of
globalists.
Yeah, instead of people who are living in sovereign countries. So you have Davos, man. And we talked about Davos in the World Economic Forum in an earlier episode. So I hope you heard that.
Yep. Technocrats and the bureaucratic elite, essentially they sort of flipped the script of our country, right? Our country was designed where people make the decisions, how self-government, right? That we govern ourselves, local control. Like, I know my school district better than some bureaucrat in DC. Mm-hmm. And so by having this decentralized bureaucracy and all of these technocrats who have no clue what my concerns are or what are the concerns of my local area, essentially that flips the script of our country from what our founding fathers envisioned.
Yeah, and it also has to do with education. So we have a group of people with college degrees. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won 48 out of 50 counties with the highest percentage of those with college degrees.
Right. Republicans used to win college-educated vote, right? Like, you go back 1980, I think, the professoriate were always Democrat, but like people with bachelor's and master's tended to be Republican. Now it's completely flipped.
And I'll give you an example. I had a friend who we were discussing who we're going to vote for in 2020. And I said, well, I'm a conservative Republican. I support the party, so I'll vote for Trump. And he said, but you're educated. You have a PhD. How dare you? How could you vote for somebody even though you have all this education? And I said, well.
Was this person a Democrat? Or?
This person was a Democrat.
Okay.
So class warfare based on education.
Right. So I don't understand the argument. What is the argument of, okay, you have a PhD, how can you vote for Trump? Like, I don't understand. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like,
they should be.
But I don't understand, like, what goes through the head of somebody like that? Like, I don't understand their mentality. Okay, so what? I have a PhD. Yeah, I earned my PhD. I wrote this fantastic dissertation, so what?
Identity politics?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, I guess the argument is what? Like, if you're highly educated, you can be a populist, right? Is that really the argument?
You're a traitor to your social caste?
Right. It's supposed to be for this, like, it just completely boggles my mind. Like, I'm still for the people. I may have I may be highly educated, but I still believe in local control. And I believe that people should make their own decisions as to how to live, how to make money, how to raise their family, how to educate their kids, and so on.
I think this blowback against school boards around the country is very interesting, because you have school boards who are telling parents, we know better than you. Even though there are books in libraries that are inappropriate for young children, there are drag shows for inappropriate for young children, a lot of parents think. So they're pushing back against this technocratic elite that sits on school boards. And I think that is a democratic check on too much power and overreach from the left.
So I think essentially when they say, you're college educated, you're highly educated, you can't vote for a populist candidate, I think essentially that comes out of fear, right? They basically, populism is a threat to the power of technocratic neoliberalism. So it comes from a selfish motivation that they say that.
Well, the left has to hold together this alliance of different types of people and identities. So you have the academics, you have Hollywood, you have the unions, you have the technocrats that are already in power. So you have this alliance, and they have to hold this together.
It's like a regime.
It's a regime, yeah, and based on identity, based on gender, based on race, too.
Based on class, on college education, based on where you come from, there's also this divide between like urban and rural, the coastal elites, and the middle of the country, who they view as like flyover land.
I think that's huge. I used to teach, and I would ask my students, what do you think of having two political parties, one being democratic urban elites and one being populist rural and small towns? Is that a problem? And I always seem to think that is a problem, because you're setting up this divide between the classes from one party to the other. And that has taken a different toll on America, because you're having the non-elites having to compete for jobs with immigrants and illegal immigrants, and compete for public services and having status with immigrants. Now, once again, on this program, we are not against immigrants. We are for immigrants. Yep. But what happens?
I'm an immigrant.
Exactly. But what happens is that if you have illegal immigration, then the non-elites have to compete for jobs, public services, and status with immigrants. And that creates division in the United States.
I'm an immigrant. I'm pro-immigrant, but I also love America, and I'm also an American. And just like everything else that the left does, they completely overdo it, right? We can't have the whole world come here, right? That's going to destroy the country, right? We have to allow a certain number of immigrants and maybe guest workers that contribute to our country and that help us, as opposed to be detrimental to the nation.
That's exactly right. And who are the technocratic overclass? Who are we talking about? Well, I'll give you an example. So in 1970, physicians and doctors and people in the healthcare system was a very low ratio from doctors to the administrative class. But if I could show you a chart, I can describe this chart. It is a completely upwardly sloping curve with people who are administrators at hospitals. And my wife is one of them. She works in a legal department for a huge hospital system, and she handles all the boards and other regulations, but she has no medical training. She's an administrator. So you could say my wife is part of the administrative class. But that just goes to show you that even in corporations, or even in segments of the population you would never expect, you wouldn't believe how many administrative folks as a ratio to just individual physicians. Yeah. It's the same way in college education. There's very few professors, but there's more administrators at the college level.
Yeah. I recently saw this chart on Twitter where since like 1970, college enrollment has grown by like 5% of students, but the number of administrators has like grown by 500% or something. So that's where your tuition is going, right? So your tuition has increased, 1,000% since 1970, and it goes into the hiring of these administrators.
And you have HR in corporations that are trying to hire managerial types. You have the business schools,
human resources, and all these bureaucrats in the corporate world.
And we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion last time. So you have people who are DEI, you have people who are ESG folks too, environmental sustainability and governance.
Yeah.
So the urban-rural divide, once again, we have hubs versus the heartland. So urban hubs on the coasts and in the middle of the country in cities like Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, go down to the middle of the country. But mainly we're worried about the Northeast elites and the east of the country and that corridor down the Atlantic and the corridor down the Pacific and the West in California. So hubs versus heartland. And then elites are always saying to the heartland folks, hey, why don't you move to cities? Which we see this happening in China too, by the government kind of wants people to move to, we have a rate of urbanization.
Power.
Yeah, to get more power. So elites are saying to heartland members, move to hubs, quit working in natural resources, oil and gas, coal, learn to code. Yeah. Give up your lifestyle and move to the urban core.
Yeah. I was going to say about the corporate world, in addition to all the bureaucrats, HR, diversity, equity and inclusion people, middle managers, right? The growth in middle managers. And the reason for that is simple, right? You have all these college educated people. I mean, they have to work somewhere, right? So the growth of all these administrators, the bureaucracy of technocrats across the spectrum of institutions, that's one of the reasons why it has grown.
One of the saddest things is when I ran for office and I would meet with senior citizens and I would go to their homes on door to door. They'd invite me in and you would see photos of their children. And I would say, where do your children live? Oh, they moved to the coast. They moved to this city. They moved to that city. So you have a class of people who think the only way they can make it is to move to cities. Although, interestingly enough, 57% of Americans have never lived outside their home states. And 37% have always lived in their hometowns. So you still have folks that you should be able to stay in the heartland, in your hometown, and be able to make a good living. It used to be that way, except for many jobs got outsourced over the years from 1999 to 2009. And so that was a scary thing. And then we have depopulation, our lower population from Americans, because people who live in urban areas are less likely to have kids in their 20s.
Interesting. So that's kind of paradoxical, actually, right?
Mm-hmm. It is.
If you live in an urban area, you're surrounded by other people, right? So you would think that, there would be more opportunities for mating and marriage, but it's actually the opposite. Weird, huh?
In our county, in Arlington County, across the river from Washington, D.C., upscale suburb, you see more dogs walking around than cats. I mean, and children. Sorry, not cats.
Right. So yeah. Oh, I was also gonna mention. I really love that quote from Animal Farm, Orwell.
Some are more equal than others.
Yeah, some more equal than others. I mean, essentially, that's their mentality, right? Of these bureaucracies, of these technocrats. That we know better what's good for you. You're just a rube, right? We are highly educated. We are more enlightened people than you are. You're just a peasant living in in rural Missouri or whatever, and we are the experts who know what's best for you. So it's a really demeaning, almost like a totalitarian mindset, complete opposite of what our founding fathers had in mind when they designed this beautiful nation.
And then you have the creative class too, which I did my dissertation and first book on the creative class, and that's the idea that people who are artists, who are writers, people who have PhDs, who are scientists, who file patents. The more types of those people tend to live in cities. And then they're very politically correct, too. So they vote Democrat and they live in cities. And then other people look at them and say, oh, well, I don't have those types of talents. Can I make it in cities? And that's unfair to people who are living in the heartland, because we have, it used to be, if you're working class and lived in the heartland, you could afford the things that you make. So if you work for Ford, you could buy a new Ford car every couple of years. Now it's getting to the point with inflation that you may work in manufacturing, which is very rare in the United States, but you can't afford, but you can't afford the products that you make. So inflation is killing that. So, inflation is an insidious tax against poor people.
I think that also comes from the fact that we used to have elites that really cared about the country, that were patriotic. I mean, yeah, sure, they wanted to make profit, and everybody likes profit, but But they also realize that, hey, it does me no good as a capitalist, as an entrepreneur, when I produce products that the people that I employ can't afford. It's going to brew resentment in the workforce. It's bad for the country. We had more socially conscious, I feel like, entrepreneurs like Henry Ford, who understood that, we're all in this together, right? I may be the one who is running this company, but my company lives in the country, and the country is more important than making, an extra buck.
After COVID, there's something interesting about urbanization where you had some people who were resigning from their jobs or working from home, moving out of the urban areas and moving to smaller towns and smaller suburbs.
During COVID.
Yeah. So that's a trend. And moving south to the Sun Belt, moving to counties or cities where they feel like they are more politically accepted, especially if they're conservative. So you have outgrowth from, you've read this a lot in California, moving to Texas, people in New York moving to Florida. So you have states that have low taxation, low regulation. So there's kind of a flip side to that. So we still have, though, the hardcore urban elite who believe that they have this wonderful social oasis in these cities.
I just read this article that said something like 90% of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley now live in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
They just moved. Yeah, they just said, hey, I'm not going to live in San Francisco. I'm not going to leave my Mercedes in the middle of San Francisco. I'm getting the hell out of here, man.
Yeah, and then they buy cash buys for their homes, and then they price out lower class people who can't afford homes, and the rents go up. And so people are like, well, we like having all this new economic activity, but with regular inflation being at 9%, consumer price index print that just came out, you have inflation, and then you also have housing inflation and prices going up. So you're priced out of your community, not to mention property taxes get bid up too. And so you can't afford the property tax, you can't afford rent if you're a renter, and you can't afford to buy.
Tucker said the other day, I think this week, that Americans having the hardest time in history of buying a house.
Yeah, I would say also analogous to the 70s, where you had interest rates that were in the double digits and with inflation in the double digits. But yes, I would agree with that, the costs. So going back to...
Especially we have like BlackRock and all of these institutional...
Buying up
lots of housing, raising the price. They just come in and say, hey, you're asking for $500,000, I'm going to pay you $750 in cash.
Sure. And Bill Gates buying up farmland.
Yeah, exactly. And Chinese too. Mm-hmm. China buying up farmland. Tucker had this segment on the other day where China bought farmland near sensitive, top secret U.S. military bases. I mean, it's scary stuff.
It is scary stuff. So going back to the populists, you have this concept of asymmetric multiculturalism. Now, what is that? That sounds like a mouthful. Well, we know about multiculturalism, and it's good to have that to a certain level until it becomes part of identity politics and everything is gender and race.
Right.
So the media celebrates immigrants and minorities in politics. Now, both political parties do this. And the people of color who are running for political office from both political parties are celebrated, and for good reason. And the Democratic Party was predicted that people of color would vote Democrat. And now we're seeing that Hispanics in Southern Texas are starting to vote Republican as a outgrowth of conservative values and backlash against immigration and anti-religious fervor on the left.
Myra Flores.
Exactly.
Just won in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. Elon Musk, she was the first Republican that he voted for.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have elite contempt for white supremacism and white nationalism. So anything you say that is against the regime, you're white and a male, usually you're labeled as a domestic extremist, a white supremacist, and a white nationalist.
Like, where did that come from? Like, I can't disagree without being labeled? I mean, that's like, what is this, China, Soviet Union? Like, what is this, Nazi Germany?
Well, remember in the Soviet Union, if you disagree with the regime, if you're a dissident, you were considered mentally ill.
Yeah, I mean,
and so you had to go to a psychiatric facility and have medicine and lobotomies and things like that.
That's what the regime does, right? It's because they have to brand you. They have to discredit you. Otherwise, other people look up and say, maybe he's got a point, you know?
Sometimes we have also a concept called corporatism. Now, corporatism is when different elites share power on, for example, on corporate boards. So instead of having unions as part of the lower class and not a part of the decision-making complex, you have union heads are on the board of corporations in countries like Germany and Japan. So these corporations become self-governing, and you have unions, corporations, and governments acting together. So this becomes not small interest group pluralism. This is large interest groups, and they have control rather than small families or churches or charities or nonprofits. Donors, right. And then you have agricultural, labor, military, business, scientific, guild associations. These are all part of what normally would be a healthy form of pluralism that are becoming more corporatist in nature. And that's a dangerous thing.
It's a racket, right? So you have donors who pump money to elect politicians who increase the power of the technocratic neoliberals. And those same politicians then reward these donors with huge contracts, regulatory breaks, or tax cuts. And so it's a loop, man.
And it creates interest group liberalism. So you have political action committees, dark money coming into politics, unions, non-governmental organizations like the World Economic Forum, international organizations like United Nations, and nonprofits and charities that are becoming bigger foundations controlled by the wealthy and other types of elites.
Oh, you got the foundations too. I forgot about the foundations.
Bill and Melinda Gates.
Yeah. Did you? So I don't know if you saw this, but the other day, this woman, Tina Chan, who founded Time's Up, this, anti-sexual harassment.
Time's Up. Okay.
Anti-sexual harassment group in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. After the Harvey Weinstein scandal, mm-hmm. She was just so. And remember, Time's Up is now bankrupt, and she got caught in a scandal. But guess what? Do you know what she's doing now? Obama Foundation has hired her.
Oh, interesting. So
you see how the regime rewards itself.
And the Obama Foundation is connected to the University of Chicago, another elitist organization where President Obama is trying to create his presidential library at University of Chicago.
So you have this nexus of nonprofits, foundations, universities, technocratic neoliberals in mm-hmm. government and corporations, and the politicians. So this phalanx of, I don't know what you call it, this regime, I guess. Right? This regime that basically scratches each other's backs.
And another problem we talked about earlier with offshoring jobs, this is a particular onerous thing for people who are trying to live in the rural heartland. From 1999 to 2009, multinational corporations cut 864,000 jobs in America, while adding 2.9 million workers internationally. So this is the idea that you're going to cut investment spending too, and focus on consumerism. 70% of the economy is consumer. And then you have this shock from China and Mexico, cheap goods from cheap labor that would normally violate labor laws in the United States. So you have shoes being created in Vietnam, made in Vietnam.
Or slave labor in China.
And slave labor in China, exactly.
Yeah. Nike talks about, they hate America. They say all these bad things about America while staying silent about, Chinese genocide.
Yeah. And you mentioned how these community activists are getting rich. I think that is something. We talked about Obama. He went to elite institutions, Columbia, Harvard Law School. Along the way, his wife was making six figures. There's this myth of Obama acting like a community organizer, but he only did that, I'd say once every 6 weeks. I have people who knew him I know people who knew Obama back in the days when he was a community organizer, and he didn't do a lot of community organizing. And his wife almost left him because he wouldn't get a real job.
Speaking of Obama, did you see that story yesterday from Ronnie Jackson? In 2020, he tweeted that Biden needs a cognitive exam. So remember, Ronnie Jackson, he served as the White House physician to George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump. So 3 presidents. And he tweeted, as I said, that Biden needs a cognitive exam. Within 20 minutes, Obama emails him and says, "I'm very disappointed in you. You should do better next time. You made a lot of friends in our administration. What you said about Joe Biden was highly disrespectful." Like within 20 minutes, directly. It wasn't like his spokesperson or somebody like that. It was directly from Obama.
Oh, yeah. And with the big foundations with wealthy elites running them, I mentioned the University of Chicago is kind of a den of elitism in the middle of the country. But you have people who are from the heartland. They are focused on surviving. They are trying to feed their families, put food on the table. They don't have time for local politics. They don't have time to join these big nonprofits. They don't have time to raise money or go door to door community organizing. Maybe that's needed, but they're not doing it because they're having so hard of a time putting their lives together.
Yeah. I mean, this is really interesting. This managerial elite, I mean, I don't know, man. If it continues, I mean, somebody has to rein in the administrative state. Did you see this other story? So in her book, Deborah Birx, she served as the White House coordinator during COVID, White House coronavirus coordinator in 2020. In her book, she says that she altered administration's COVID status reports to the states because she was like the intermediary between the Trump administration and sending advice to the states, and she altered them. She made it much more scary than the data actually showed, and she admits that in the book. She falsified official Trump administration reports. I mean, that's the kind of bureaucrats that they run the country. I mean, essentially, somebody has to rein them in.
This is what Governor Greg Abbott and Governor Ron DeSantis were warning against, that centralized control. But then you had Andrew Cuomo, who is accusing the Trump administration of all these things. But all these people are tied together, these Fauci's and Deborah Birx, with this technocratic expertise that they think they've built up over the years, totally separated from the realities on the ground in the heartland. So it's difficult. You have two political spectrums and tracks, and it's come down to two tracks, which is very dangerous. You have one for elites and one for heartland populists, and the Democrats are the urban elites, and the Republicans are working class whites in the heartland. Now, take a look at this.
It's almost like we have two Americas.
Yeah, that's the point. And the wealthiest 50 counties, 42 of the wealthiest 50 counties were represented by Democrats in 2018.
Wow.
42. And then we know that Democrats run cities and many urban counties in the first place. And then going back to the working class and people with college degrees, Republicans, 29% have college degrees. But Republican white voters with less than a college degree are 59% of the party. It's gone from 29 to 59%.
Wow.
And then back in the 90s, when you had powerful unions and Democrats, remember when they were suspicious and fearful of illegal immigration?
Yes.
The pushback was coming from the Democrats, who were worried about illegal immigrants taking jobs from union families.
Right. Bill Clinton changed that, right? Because he transformed the Democratic Party from a working class party to the elite party.
And then if you look at polls, and this goes across country, many polled in 2018 do not want more immigrants, illegal or legal. Now, I don't know where they're getting that. I don't know where that's coming from. There's this backlash against immigrants, even though the United States is a country of many races. So you have to worry about the backlash against immigrants, and you're seeing hate crimes against immigrants too. So I think that's a worrisome statistic. But it used to be Democrats were suspicious and fearful of illegal immigration. Now, 53% of Latinos favor deporting illegal immigrants. My in-laws, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, are very much in favor. They're Hispanic, and they're very much in favor of deporting illegals, and they're against illegal immigration. So you're seeing that backlash. Now, one of the problems is when you have these two tracks of people, when you have populists and techno-elites, they swing back and forth where you're getting extreme candidates elected on both sides. And this is unhealthy. This is against democratic pluralism. So we worry about that. So democratic pluralism is more healthy for electoral democracy. But joining groups that compete with government power will somehow reduce government power. That's kind of what you want. What the founders believe, that groups that people join would be a check and balance against wealthy elites and
countervailing power.
Yes.
Every power must have a countervailing power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Sometimes, though, the populists will bring in people who have never voted or who never participated in politics. We saw that with the Tea Party, too, where a lot of people who are apolitical throughout their lives become more political as they they get older. Yeah, you see this with the baby boomers. Kind of sometimes they're involved in politics during the Vietnam era. They kind of check out and make money in the 90s, and then they're back into politics too. So some of this stuff is generational that you have to watch out for.
And you have this phenomenon where the elites, the college-educated, coastal urban elites, they have almost no interaction with people who live in the heartland, right? With the working class. So they don't really know their concerns. They live like in a bubble, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really the problem. We need to have more mixing of the different classes and people from different education levels.
Yeah, it's like the Hunger Games movies. You have this capital far away and you have these different districts, and there's these people living in the bubble, and the capital are trying to impose their political will over the heartland.
Yeah, because nobody has the right answers, right? You want to have some balance in the country, right? You don't want to have complete neoliberal domination. On the other hand, you don't want to have complete popular domination, right? So you have to have mixing of people, right? You have to have a mixture of people so that everyone has a say in our democracy.
Yeah, and you self-censor all the time, too, because you have to worry about the technocratic elites. If you disagree with them, they're going to report you. They're going to protest against you. They're going to shame you online. So they'll shame and name and dox you. Yeah.
or use the power of the state to go after your business, to go after you, to go after your family. It's really scary stuff.
I mentioned earlier about the Soviet Union, and the Soviets would come down hard against dissidents and say that you're mentally ill. Well, in the United States, we have psychiatrists, individual doctors, who like to say that Trump and his supporters are mentally ill. But they say nothing about Joe Biden being senile. Where are the psychiatrists who are out there who would want to do a case study on Joe Biden and his demise mentally, his cognition? You don't see that, but you did see a lot of psychiatrists who would say Trump and his supporters have some type of mental illness. So you don't see that from both sides, and that's really frustrating. But Trump voters, many of them had never voted before, and local politics now is becoming more important. We talked about the parents and school boards, but this is how the Tea Party evolved too. And the Tea Party is given away to America First. But when the Tea Party was important after the financial crisis and during Obama's quest for Obamacare, you saw people who were never involved in political processes, and mainly in the heartland, coming together for the Tea Party. So this is a situation of a populist movement too, that gave way to the America First crowds under Trump. You don't have the Tea Party influence like you used to do. But in 2010 to 2000, I would say about 2014, the Tea Party was really strong in conservative movement.
Brent, you were saying about how totalitarians call people that they disagree with mentally ill.
Yes.
So here's an interesting quote. If you disagree with neoliberals, they call you violent. And because you're violent, you need to be disarmed, debanked, and unpersoned.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is a great quote.
So that's really the power of branding, right? We're going to brand you as a white supremacist, as violent, as, a racist, as sexist, as a misogynist, right? And then because you're X, then we can do all these other things too.
Yeah, there's a great quote from people who were wearing masks during the pandemic who would say, "I'm not a Trump voter. I wear a mask." So virtue signaling through mask COVID theater, which is pretty interesting.
And I hate to be hyperbolic, but essentially that's like the Nazi strategy, right? That's what they did to the Jews. They said, they're dirty, they're unclean. All our problems are because of them. Therefore, the Holocaust.
Yeah. And elites also believe they got to the top with hard work. And a lot of this is in academia, too. And I wonder if that has changed over the years. Do elites do the same work that they always did? Now, we've had the power elite concept that goes all the way back to the 50s and 60s by a sociologist by the name of C. Wright Mills. And you should really check out C. Wright Mills. But he wrote a book called The Power Elite. And this is the technocratic industrial complex. You have this alliance between governmental elites, military elites, think tanks, academia, the government class, bureaucracies. So C. Wright Mills was talking about and predicted this back in the 50s and 60s. So he was doing trail breaking work back then. And he thought about the creative class too. So the thought leaders and influencers, are coming from the left? Are they coming from the right? So that's part of the elite. Also, a new trend is the STEM education movement, where you have science, technology, engineering, and mathematics jobs. It sounds great. And Vadim is a STEM person.
Right.
I've got a little bit of statistics and mathematics in my background.
Oh, you have a lot more than that.
So we're kind of STEM workers too, as data scientists and data engineers. And is that a part of the elite? I wonder about that. Is it a meritocracy? Can we get more people from the heartland? It's like quit coal mining or quit working in the oil fields and learn to code.
I think it's a noble goal, but you can't just foist a certain careers onto people, right? You can't just say, hey, learn to code. Well, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to work in the field, or I want to work on the oil pipeline. This idea that go learn to code, it's not up to you to decide what I do with my life. I may want to do that, I may not. Your job as government representative, leave people alone. Let people decide for themselves. Free up industry, deregulate industry, let the market forces decide what the industries of the future are. And that will drive demand for people, goods, services, and that will decide the careers of the future.
One of the most fundamental economic rights you can have is to work where you want. You can quit your job. You can find another. You can go after what your heart pursues. You can make more money. So this idea that you have to stay in the populous heartland and not go to cities, or vice versa, is something that is not fundamental to American capitalism. And the ruling classes don't want to share power anyway. So the managerial elites are dominating. You have this high-tech caste society with STEM jobs in the cities, and then you get populist demagogues too. So this is what we have to worry about.
So here's another, I think, underappreciated aspect of technocratic neoliberalism. So like all of these bureaucracies, all of these managerial elites, one aspect is power, right? They're, they're hungry for power. But I think another underappreciated point is that a lot of what they do is self-preservation, right? They know that what they do is nonsense, but they have to appear to be important, right? To be critical to the country. A lot of the things that they do, they act out of self-preservation too. Pursuit of power, yes, but also self-preservation.
And the administrative elite digs in with their jobs, especially in Washington, D.C. There are some people who are just so dug into their job, especially in the bureaucracy, because look at the benefits they're getting.
Right.
They're getting a great salary. They're getting all the different types of healthcare and retirement benefits and a pension after 20 years. And so they make it harder for a meritocracy and people to come in from the bottom, because to move here in New York City, Los Angeles, some of these elite coastal cities, the standard of living is so high, the quality of life is maybe better, you could argue, but it's very expensive to live here. So who are the people that are moving here? Well, there are people who have mommy and daddy, the bank of mom and dad, that can support them while they're doing jobs in the capitals that don't make a lot of money. And so this is unfair too. So it's the urban elites that are able to dig in and protect their jobs and become more technocratic over the years.
That's why they have no use for populists like Trump, because they know that Trump doesn't really care what they think. They know that Trump has no use for them.
Yeah, you have different presidents. Reagan did that too. He was the first person to start.
They hated Reagan.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. I mean, he did the firing the air traffic controllers, that union. He was a union buster on that. And that sent a message that really changed things, because, we had this big conflict between the capitalists and the labor unions. And Reagan came in and said, oh, you're going to strike and you're going to shut down air travel in the United States? No, I don't think so. You're all fired.
I actually went back and listened to some of the debates in 1980. Like, I couldn't believe, it's almost like they were saying almost identical things about Reagan and they said about Trump. I didn't realize how bad it was 40 years ago. I thought the country had, more class, if you will. People were generally nicer to each other. But no, like if you go back to the debates, what Carter was saying, what the media was saying, what the administrative state was saying about Reagan, it's almost a carbon copy of what they were saying about Trump.
Yeah, and in foreign policy, they were saying Reagan was going to start the next nuclear war.
He was a cowboy, right?
Yeah, the cowboy.
Well, he was a cowboy, but a good cowboy.
Right. But I think this idea of the high-tech caste system that's emanating from the capitals of San Francisco, Silicon Valley, New York City, where you're finding that people who are elites that are belonging to professions that also have STEM degrees, where you want a meritocracy. That's the tough part. You want to be able to grow and have upward mobility due to education. Then you have student loans. So you have people who are already in the hole because they've taken so many student loans. We need more. And in addition to STEM people, how about vocational education? How about the shortage in plumbers?
It doesn't serve the elites as well.
You're right. Yeah, but you can get a good job working on an oil field. You can make $80,000 a year as a roughneck working on but who wants those jobs?
I was thinking about this college government racket. The government gives loans to students to go to college. The students go to college, get indoctrinated in college, come out much more liberal, and help the Democratic Party. So you see how the feedback loop. You see how the feedback loop is closed. Like,
sure.
I have to give liberals a lot of credit because their schemes are much more elaborate than what conservatives come up with. I admire that from a certain standpoint.
Yeah, it's very insidious. 20-somethings, Generation Z, are turning against Biden. Not sure why. I don't know if it's because they think he's too old or if they think he doesn't care about people like them or he's not hip. About the hippest thing that Biden has are his sunglasses, his aviator sunglasses. That's about it. So you're seeing that a lot of 20-somethings are frustrated with the way government is, probably because of climate change. They're not seeing a lot of movement on climate change.
So they want to be more far left.
I think so. Yeah. They want AOC.
Well, it's part of the brainwashing, right? They go to college, they get indoctrinated into this CRT, queer theory, all this, climate change alarmism, and then they come out and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die in 5 years unless we address climate change, right?
Yeah.
That's really the insidious nature of this government college industrial complex.
I'm not going to get married and have kids because I'm scared of climate change. Exactly. Or I'm going to a psychiatrist. There's people who serve as psychiatrists who say they treat patients that are worried about climate change and have a lot of stress and mental anguish and mental health issues because of
I've heard about that. Yeah.
of climate change.
And the other thing, so in addition to climate change, alarmism, they're also being taught that the country is bad, that the country is racist, this is a bad country. So, that really weighs heavily on your psyche, right? Like, what am I going to do with my life? This country, there's no hope for me. This country is so bad. This is what I hate the most about leftists is that they don't allow people to thrive. They want to control people. They don't want you to be independent, productive, hopefully wealthy person, because if you are that, then you're outside of their control.
Yeah, people are turning against the country. You see during July 4th, you do a survey and you ask young people, are you proud of the United States? And many of them say no, because they're conditioned to have these grievances. There's grievance politics and victimization, victimization politics with identity politics too. So you have, due to race and gender, a built-in grievance that maybe it's against boycotting Israel. So that is on college campuses. Maybe it's because you feel persecuted due to microaggressions based on race and gender and sexuality.
Yeah. And this idea that if there's something bad in my life, it's somebody else's fault, right? Mm-hmm. That's grievance, right? Like, I can't find a job that pays well. Oh, it's somebody else's fault. It's white man's fault. It's Christians. It's Republicans. It's Trump. This idea that take responsibility, improve yourself, get better, get more skill. That empowers the individual, not the administrative state.
That's the message from Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson,
yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He says, take control, don't blame others. He famously said, make your bed early in the morning.
Right.
Which I'm not sure how I'm making, but he's talking about a personal individual responsibility. and many young white males and some women too. I would say Jordan Peterson's audience skews towards white males, but whatever. The point is that you learn people are turning around their lives because they're taking more individual responsibility rather than having grievance politics and blaming others for their plight.
Grievance is not going to get you anywhere.
I mean, AOC, it seems like that's all she talks about. Is grievances. She's always mad about something.
Like I can't listen to her. Like I can't. Like, dude, she's not inspiring. Every time she opens her mouth, it's somebody else's fault or all of these problems. I just can't listen to her.
Yeah, a good example of an urban elite being something that she's not. She went to Boston University, which is one of the most expensive private schools that you can go to.
And it's not that prestigious.
Yeah, it's not even that great of a school.
I went to a better school. I went to UC. UC Irvine is in the top 10.
She always talks about bartending too. It's like, oh, well, you were giving drinks to poor people and you think that's kind of a valued profession. I would argue that she caused some social pain by delivering alcohol to customers that maybe were overserved.
Here's my take on AOC, right? In a healthy society, nobody would take her seriously. Nobody would know that she existed.
This is a center-right country, especially in the heartland too. And so the only way she could come forward would be to have a candidate that she glommed onto Bernie Sanders. And now she worked for the Bernie Sanders.
Now they're talking about her running for president in 2024.
Yeah.
Like she's going to be like the new Obama, right? Like this young person comes out of nowhere, right?
Yeah. You know? The New York Times, they laud AOC, but then when it comes to conservatives, Latina women, it's the Latinas are far right. They're extremists, even though AOC is a socialist who rebranded herself as a democratic socialist. So it's very frustrating, this new class warfare.
Like I said, like in a healthy society, nobody would take her seriously. Like I can't listen to these shallow, boring, grievance-driven people. That's not empowering. It's not inspiring. I can't take these people. Like I can't listen to them.
And then that gives way to more populist demagogues because people get frustrated. I remember during Obama's tenure where I just felt like I was powerless. It felt like the left owned all the different institutions of power. And this is why Trump probably lost in 2020, because the election was focused on the different aspects of political power controlled by the elites. But you feel like you don't have any political power. And this is when demagogic populists become more powerful. So that is what we worry about with this new caste system between the two groups of heartland populists and managerial overclass.
Yeah.
So technocratic liberals, we have this high-tech caste system. Some people are more equal than others, right out of Animal Farm by George Orwell. Then we have a working class of low-density populated folks from the heartland. And this gives way to populist demagogues. And so you have the managerial elite and the populists, and it swings back and forth. And you have to have that democratic pluralism where you feel the freedom to join groups and have fellowship and have churches become important, have families become important, have individual choice become important, rather than all the choices become centralized from the political capitals and the managerial elites and the bureaucrats.
So I have a question for you, Brent. Mm-hmm. How do we return to democratic pluralism?
That's the tough one. And I think Lind didn't really answer that in his book. And maybe it's too late. Is it too late? Are we asking ourselves?
I mean, it's going to be really hard because you have all these bureaucrats, entrenched bureaucracies, right? They have a stake in the game, right? They don't want to lose their jobs. I think what we can do, maybe not eliminate their jobs, but basically reduce their power, make them null.
You have the public service unions too. AFSCME, that's an important public service union, SEIU.
Yes.
So you have to worry about that. They just become so entrenched. And that's the worry. So can you get people to break out of that cycle? Can you get the media to break out of this cycle? Can you get Hollywood to break out of that cycle where they want technocratic elites? You have the technology elites coming from Silicon Valley, the Hollywood elites. How do you break through? Maybe it's a separate economy for people who are coming from the right. We have alternative products, alternative companies. Maybe that's one way to do it. Maybe we have less divisive political discourse. Right. And also we have educational opportunities that are vocational focused instead of college focused. Mm-hmm. And so we can get those jobs back in the economy that it went away. So it is a frustrating time, and we have this caste system between the managerial overclass, technocratic neoliberals, and the working class heartland folks.
We definitely need to reduce the power of the administrative state and the managerial elite, because right now they act essentially as the fourth branch of government.
Well, we're about over an hour, folks. So I hope you've learned something and take something away from this, but don't lose hope. Don't feel like you have to join one class or the other. Think about getting more involved in your community, not necessarily protesting, or that may be part of it, but watching out for local government, watching out for the city council, watching out for prosecutors who have become soft on crime, watching out for school boards who are taking the power away from your children. And so sometimes politics is local. A lot of this stuff happens at the local level. So that is where you can make a difference.
We need to return the power back to the people and return decision-making back to democratically elected institutions and systems.
All right, the managerial overclass, let's make sure that that power is leveled out, and make sure the technocratic neoliberals and the high-tech caste system is leveled out too, and make sure that people from the heartland have some type of opportunity. And then you're getting the rise of politicians who are very aware of this, like J.D. Vance, Blake Masters. You have
love them both.
Yeah, you have Peter Thiel on the kind of the investment side, who's above that and helping out folks that are like-minded.
Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson in the media.
Sure. So you have rebels out there. So you have rebel capitalists who are libertarian, who are worried about the overreach of the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Department of Treasury. We have Bitcoin. So all of our episodes, we hope that you listen to them because they tie things together.
Yes. Understand the big picture. Don't panic. Don't lose hope, but understand the big picture and make a better life for yourself.
So we hope you enjoyed this hour and this episode. Thank you. Enjoy your week, and look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you, and have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the Truth Caviar Show. Email us at truthcaviarshow@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the show. And remember, no bias, no bull, no fear, just hard truths.